Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have Todos Medical Ltd. It trades on the OTCQB under the symbol TOMDF and engineers life-saving diagnostic solutions for the early detection of a variety of cancers. Please welcome its CEO, Gerald Commissiong. Welcome back, Gerald.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
And thank you to everyone who's listening in on today's presentation. Note the safe harbor statements. We have changed the format of the presentation somewhat to make sure that everyone understands the short-term, mid-term, and long-term value propositions that Todos is bringing forward. So just as a general reminder, we're developing solutions in therapeutics, diagnostics, and immune support. We do have a COVID-19 oral antiviral botanical drug candidate that's pursuing a very large market. We're going after the same market as Pfizer and Merck with their oral pills. We see our value proposition being that we are natural. There are likely many fewer side effects. And importantly, the window of treatment is larger because we're not solely an antiviral, but also an anti-cytokine. And so it can extend from prevention all the way into late-stage hospital, including intubated patients. So that's our value proposition on the oral antiviral side. However, it's important to remember that the company was founded, as just mentioned, as really developing the next generation of cancer and Alzheimer's tests. And we've added COVID, obviously, since the beginning of the outbreak. So we're more than just a COVID company. We are and started as a cancer and Alzheimer's company, which we believe are the same type of biology onset onto different cells. So cancer cells are dividing cells, Alzheimer's cells obviously are non-dividing. And so some of the diagnostic methods and interventions that you can use based on the biology of the underlying mechanisms are the same. And we see this as an area that we can exploit given our position on the diagnostic side. With regards to COVID, that's exactly what we did. We started on the diagnostic side, and it led us, based upon work that we did in biomarkers, to certain therapeutics. So really this immunodiagnostics, we believe is where things need to start, and that's where they will move into the therapeutic side, and we're bridging that gap, with COVID. We have novel technology platforms protected by intellectual property that have a number of competitive advantages. And unlike, many companies developing treatments, we are actually generating money. We have a lab that does COVID testing now that has seen a record increase in sales. And we also have lab clients that we supply COVID PCR testing products to that are also seeing record sales. So right now is a very, very busy time at Potential. A bunch of meetings this morning to deal with testing related matters. And we see that this will, we expect that this will continue and that this wave of testing will be here to stay so we don't get caught flat footed again. So we're going to be leveraging our COVID biomarkers also to deliver wellness solutions in other areas. So the idea of biomarkers leading to interventions and wellness solutions, we think is something that has greater utility than just in COVID. And we intend to leverage this kind of activity that we've seen in the COVID front to deal with other areas. With that said, COVID is still lurking. We all know, there's no question that COVID is a major, major problem. Our national strategy from the very beginning has relied on the idea, and some may say the fantasy, of herd immunity against SARS-CoV-2. There has been a very successful, in my opinion, vaccination campaign that has increased overall immunity to SARS-CoV-2. Unfortunately, it hasn't reached everybody. There is a large percentage of the unvaccinated who do have some immunity from prior infection, although that's not recognized at the current time in the United States. It is recognized outside the United States, and we think this Omicron wave will force the recognition of prior immunity from infection-acquired immunity to be recognized. And that's something that we think is going to become much, much more important, and eventually neutralizing antibody testing to evaluate that will be critical. But right now, this Omicron variant is accounting for probably a majority of cases, although it's not really clear what percentage because there's a clear sampling bias in the genetic testing that we're doing to confirm which variant there is, and we don't have enough genetic testing. So we need to improve upon that, but it's clear Omicron's a big problem. It's a huge percentage of cases, and even people who are boosted, so 3 shots, are still coming down with Omicron due to its immune evasiveness. So this is something that we haven't seen yet in the pandemic. The vaccines have held up extremely well before Omicron in protecting against infection, and boosters were really designed to buttress that, and were very effective against Delta. Unfortunately, that's not the case with Omicron. However, it does appear that, longer-term immunity, T-cell immunity, and sometimes B-cell immunity persists. And that's really what's driving the reduction in hospitalization. So, this is something that has to be watched, because now, immune evasion is something that is not theoretical. It has happened. And then the question is, well, will it ultimately be able to evade T cells? Right now, it doesn't look like that's the case, but we need to monitor this, and we need to monitor new variants very closely. Why? Well, because we know there are a lot of people who have very little protection. There are 16 million Americans over the age of 80. They don't respond very well to any type of vaccination, whether it's COVID, whether it's flu. They just don't have the immune system they used to have to be able to produce immunity. And there's a large number of immune-compromised people in the United States who are taking drugs that, in fact, reduce the likelihood of immunity persisting. And so there are a large number of people at risk. And in general, the general population who has received vaccines, there are now a number of breakthrough cases, and we're starting to hear about long COVID, which is something that we need to watch out for, because in a breakthrough case, viral loads can be very similar between vaccinated and unvaccinated. And viral load can lead to viral reservoir. And there's an emerging body of evidence that viral reservoirs, as well as inflammation caused by viral reservoirs, can lead to long COVID. And so we need, this long COVID situation is something that is becoming more important. People have been talking about it for some time, but now that it's been 2 years, some of these symptoms have been persisting for 2 years. And now that there's immune evasion that could impact virtually anybody, no matter how many times you've been vaccinated, and reinfection is occurring at an alarming rate, it's something that we have to pay close attention to. And so while vaccination is critical and building overall immunity with the goal of herd immunity is important, it's, in my opinion, that herd immunity will not be achieved insofar as protecting from infection, because new variants are able to escape immunity and the spike is mutating so quickly. And some other aspects are mutating quickly. And so we have to start thinking about other ways to address COVID than just relying on vaccines. So what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to briefly touch on our revenue-producing products and services now, and spend the majority of the time talking about Tolavir and what we're doing on the clinical development side, and then bring it back to the base of the company, which is really our proprietary diagnostics, and how we think that this could improve standards in cancer, Alzheimer's, and importantly in COVID-19, because we're seeing now that even with a lot of PCR testing, even with a lot of rapid testing, the quantity is not enough, and the biology of these tests are not ideal for the purposes, the intended uses that we're asking of them versus what they were designed for. And so new technologies need to come onto the market to address this. And we think the 3CL protease is the way to go. So a little bit on our revenue. So we have a CLIA-CAP certified lab in Alpharetta, Georgia. We completed the acquisition of that in April 2021, started in January 2020. And we are generating revenue now. We've seen huge increases in demand. We have demand right now that we're looking to make sure that we can meet of well upwards of 10,000 tests a day at this point. And our automation can handle it. We don't have enough people at this point, but we're rapidly hiring. And so we're making a lot of progress to be able to get to that number, that 10,000 a day, and ultimately to that 20,000 a day, and continue to expand, because we think, when the positivity rate starts to come down, you're going to have to do pooling, because we're going to start to want to monitor potential reinfection. And so when we pool, we think we can probably get up to 100,000 a day. But on single tests, 10 to 20,000 a day is certainly something we can handle. And right now we have the demand for it, and we're in the process of meeting that demand and hiring to make sure that we meet that demand. So we see huge increase in sales at Provista. Also, our client labs, we have a subsidiary called Corona Diagnostics that got into the business of helping other labs automate, and then obviously supplying those labs with the reagents and supplies that they need to run testing. That business has ebbed and flowed, but certainly has picked up a lot over the holidays last year and this year. And we expect that testing is going to continue because of a continuity in political administrations going forward. So there's not going to be a sea change or a shift. The administration got caught flat-footed with testing, and now they're expanding testing. They're going to be putting those dollars finally to work that they promised to put to work, and we think that we stand to benefit from that increased testing. So we are also looking at potentially acquiring some of our labs because it makes a lot more sense for us as they need to ramp and we put up the capital needed to expand them and implement the systems for us to join forces, because then that'll add significant revenue onto our balance sheet if we have multiple labs doing this kind of volume as opposed to one. And it will also allow us to coordinate other types of tests, offer additional services, and build a presence from a marketing perspective. So that's where we're going with our Provista and our CLIA lab strategy internal. With regards to Corona Diagnostics, as you mentioned, we have a significant number of sales to third-party labs. That is growing dramatically now, and we are looking at potentially acquiring one or more of those labs that we've had relationships with for some time, because we think that this will be very synergistic both for them and for us. Now, moving beyond the lab and testing, PCR testing related revenue that we have, we do also have 2 dietary supplement products in the marketplace for immune support. We received a certificate of free sale initially in August of 2020. We launched and did some market research and identified dosing that would be best for different use cases of the dietary supplement immune support product. And so we identified a 5-day dosing regimen that people were very excited about, 12 pills a day for 5 days when people need maximum immune support. We call that Tolavir maximum strength. This we received after the initial production, which is the only reason the 3-cell protease inhibitor claim is not on the bottle, because we're still selling from the first run. We received a 3-cell protease inhibitor claim for this product. So we are marketing it as a 3-cell protease inhibitor. I'll talk about that a little later, but there's been a giant increase in 3-cell protease inhibitor interest. And so we see this as a solution that's available today, now, that you can buy on Amazon. You can buy it on mytolavir.com. We're not really selling it in bulk too much because of the demand that we're seeing from the retail channels, but we can buy it in bulk for certain distributors. And we see this as a very significant product that's growing tremendously in sales. We've had a high water mark of over $80,000 a day in sales. We're now settling in the tens of thousands. Over the weekend, we had another 50,000 plus days. So we see that, as interest in 3-cell protease inhibitors are there, and as challenges, we're starting to hear about challenges from others who are developing 3-cell protease inhibitors and actually manufacturing them and getting them into the market, which we found quite surprising. But now that we've looked into it, we understand it a little bit more. We see an increased, place for Tolavir now in the marketplace, and we intend to really drive that home. We've brought on some marketing help with II Intent, and we've hired some new marketing talent, and we're building out our marketing team. We've actually expanded our office space now, and I'm sitting in the standing right now in the office space that will be for the marketing team as we expand our marketing around Tolavir and really reach those customers that need immune support now. We expect that this is going to be something from a 5-day dosing perspective that will continue for some time. But we also see an emerging set of demands for our Tolavir daily product for a variety of reasons. One, because of price point. Instead of $299 like the Tolavir maximum strength, it is a $99 product, so it's much more accessible for people. And this is something that can be used over longer periods of time. The suggested dosing is 1 capsule twice a day. So instead of it being gone in over 5 days, this is something that 1 bottle lasts an entire month. With that, many people who are having longer term problems around 3CL protease seem to be really inclined towards the Tolavir daily immune support product. And we think that this is something that, people who use the Tolavir product, they'll have that. And then once they're done using it, they would switch over to the Tolavir daily product. And conversely, some people are using the Tolavir daily product. If they need it, given what's going on, they can switch over to the Tolavir product for a short period of time to deal with maximum strength related matters, and then switch back to the Tolavir daily to protect themselves and maybe help support their immune system overcome whatever they may be challenged with. So with that, we're seeing increasing sales here as well. And we think that this really has a longer term and more room to run from a chronic use perspective because people need to manage, chronic inflammation and other things related to immune support. So with that, just touching base on our revenue, at this point last year, we had done, about $1.3 million in revenue for the collected revenue for the month ended September 30th. This year, we're already at $7 million, and we certainly had a record quarter in Q4 of this year, both Tolavir sales that became material to the bottom line, as well as our testing and supply business, especially in the last month of the year and also heading into the first month and quarter of 2022. So we see, this ramp of increasing sales continuing, and now we're looking obviously to bring on additional sales, and now that's where we get to our Tolavir product. This is very explosive in terms of potential sales demand in the months ahead. So a little bit, this is a botanical drug product that we're looking to bring into the market. We see some pretty substantial companies that we're in the same conversation of, Pfizer, obviously, Merck, and Adamis, which is really the only one that has a direct competitor to us because they have a dual mechanism pill. They're using it in the outpatient setting. We're using ours in the inpatient setting, and then we'll expand to the outpatient setting. But we can talk a little bit about each. First, the mechanism of action. Adamis and Merck are most closely aligned there. The mechanism that they go after is RDRP, and then mutagenesis via RDRP. What this is basically trying to do is increase the number of mutations or inhibit certain aspects around the formation of mutations in order to reduce the ability of the virus, increase the virus's ability to replicate, but so much so and in the wrong ways from a Merck perspective that it'll effectively induce apoptosis. RDRP is looking to nip at the knees of the virus via antioxidant route to support the immune system. We don't really believe in these mechanisms, although we understand that they've been looked at, and the Merck pill is currently on the market. The challenge with this is that as the virus gets more replicative, as it has a higher ability to replicate, we see that these mechanisms work less and less. Whereas what we're doing with regards to Pfizer and Pfizer's doing, and what we're doing with Tolavir, we're going after 3CL protease mechanism. This mechanism appears to be consistent across all variants and cuts the virus down at the knees by stopping it from allowing to replicate. And we'll get into some of the biology around that, but it does so in a much more profound way. So you end up with a pro-molecule that cannot cut itself into the active molecules to go out and infect. And when that pro-molecule stays intact, it basically stops the replication of the virus. And that's why we believe Pfizer showed such promising data in their clinical trials. We were very hopeful for that, and we think that confirmed the mechanism of the 3CL protease inhibitor as one of, if not certainly the canonical mechanism to inhibit the replication of the virus. And then ultimately down the line, if things get a little wilder with regards to new variants, you could add things onto the 3CL protease. But the 3CL protease will be, for the long term, a key part of any drug cocktail, and right now as a standalone is effective against the current variants of concern at the early stage. Where we differentiate from what Pfizer's doing is we also have anti-cytokine in our compound. So with regards to the anti-cytokine, this extends the window of activity of Tolavir as compared to Pfizer's compound, because we can reduce the inflammation caused by the virus. And so one of the challenges that Pfizer is going to have that we're seeing is there's long turnaround times for testing, and you can only take the Pfizer and the Merck compounds after you've tested positive and been prescribed by a physician. Of course, with long turnaround times, that means delays in getting treatment. Delays in getting treatment means that you begin to fall outside the 5-day window that is expected. We do think, physicians will start to use it later, but with diminishing returns. And so given that there's a very small quantity of the Pfizer pill available, and probably the Merck pill will be the one that will get the most quantity in the short term because of lack of availability. We think that many people will fall outside the window of use of these products, and so there will be a place for Tolavir in the outpatient setting. But we are focused on the inpatient setting, the hospitalized setting. That's where we have a phase 2 trial where enrollment is effectively paused, and we have data pending. We expect that if the data is good, we will stop this study completely. And then we will move into phase 2/3. That's our expectation, as that's happened with several other studies, including Pfizer's and Merck's, where they stopped the studies based on interim data. So going a little deeper with regards to the 3-cell protease versus mutagenesis, because mutagenesis is the only other product on the market with Merck. We view mutagenesis potentially as very dangerous for a number of reasons. One, it can cause new variants because of something called escape. So if there's a likelihood that a virion will mutate in such a way that it can escape immunity, that is a very, very small percentage, and that was the basis upon which the Merck pill began to be developed by Ridgeback. The challenge, of course, is that as these variants have become more replicative, as they've been able to replicate faster and increase viral loads, there's a direct correlation to the increased likelihood of immune escape. So if you have 100 virion of the original wild type, and you had a 99% chance of stopping the virus from mutating, that means you have a 1% chance that it could. 1% on 100 virions obviously is low. We think it's obviously much, much less than 1%. I'm just giving this as an example. However, if you have 100 times, then you have a direct correlate of virions. You have 100 times the likelihood that you could increase, that you could create a variant that escapes immunity. If you have something that is 70 times higher than the 100 times, that's 7,000 times more virion that you have to go after. And that's exactly what's happened. So with Delta, it's 100 times more virions that are produced, 100 times a viral load than with the original strain. And with Omicron, it is 70 times Delta. So you're talking 7,000 times the number of virion as you did in the original strain. And with that, with the percentage escape remaining the same, you obviously have a 7,000% increase in likelihood that you're going to have an escape. We think that this is the reason why the efficacy that was 48% in the Merck interim analysis, once the full data became available, the full data showed 30%, which means that second cohort was well below 30%. And we think that with Omicron, it could become negative equity in terms of mutations. So we think that, over time, governments will begin to turn away from this. But right now, it's one of the only options on the market. And due to that scarcity of options, the FDA approved it. It's beginning to be used. The Pfizer compound is also approved and beginning to be used, but has much less availability in terms of manufacturing. So these are the two compounds that will be on the market, Merck and Pfizer. We think clearly Pfizer's compound is much, much better in the outpatient setting. The challenge is that the Pfizer compound has that there's going to be drug-drug interactions because of the compound that has to be prescribed alongside it so that it stays in the body long enough to have its effect. That compound is called ritonavir, which is an inhibitor enhancer. It slows down the pharmacokinetics and the half-life It increases the half-life of the active compound, the Paxlovid. The problem is that it increases the half-life of many other things. And so half-life of natural compounds in the body circulating, in everybody, as well as the half-life of other compounds for people who are taking other drugs can also be extended. And this will limit its use. Due to the 5-day dosing, it looks like that can be managed. With that said, it is a problem that they have to overcome, and we'll see how that, that develops in the market. Here at Todos, together with our partners NLC Pharma, we don't have that issue because we overcome, one, the compounds we're using are natural compounds, so they're nowhere near as small. They're not chemicals. They're nowhere near as small in terms of their ability to get out of the system. And two, because they're natural, at least what we've seen is you can dose differently. So we give 12 pills a day, which the treatment course, that's more similar to Merck. Merck gives 8 pills a day. So we tell people to take 3 pills 4 times a day, 2 pills 6 a day. That seems to be the dosing that allows it to stay in the body long enough. Sometimes you may suggest that a patient take a little bit more before bed so that they have higher concentrations that last longer while they're sleeping. So we view ourselves as uniquely positioned because it's a natural compound. It has the best mechanism against the virus, which is a 3-cell protease inhibitor mechanism. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as compared to Pfizer later. And importantly, as anti-cytokine. So it reduces the potential for cytokine storm in the hospital. And we have some data from an observational study in 2020 I'll show. In the outpatient setting, we think this could be especially important for stopping people from going to the hospital once they're not able to control the viral stage and really start to get bad symptoms. If you treat with this, you could potentially reduce that to the point where they can stay at home, thereby liberating hospital beds and reducing the burden on the healthcare system. Additionally, because it's a natural product, especially now in the hospitalized patients, we're starting to get increasing interest there in pediatrics. This has the potential to go for hospitalized patients, where specifically the approval for both Pfizer and Merck was in the outpatient setting, and certainly not in pediatrics, other than the Pfizer compound, which can be used for 12 years and up, who are at very, very high risk. So we see, Tolavir as being uniquely positioned. And from a manufacturing perspective, we've heard now that Pfizer is expecting to deliver 10 million doses by June, potentially another 10 million by the end of the year. We have worked extensively on our supply chain and our manufacturing, and we think we can also meet those kinds of numbers. Whereas, we've heard from a lot of people, well, Pfizer's way ahead of you, you'll never catch up. That may not, in fact, be the case from a commercial perspective. Pfizer obviously has many more resources than us, and we view, we salute them. They've done a tremendous job with regards to the pandemic, but we think we have something very important to add and can help a lot of patients. We spoke already about the 3-cell protease, just a little bit into the biology. The virus enters the cell. It does a variety of things when it does that, but one of the key things it does is it makes polyproteins, so many copies of the virus protein that are strung together that the protease goes and it basically cuts them into little pieces that become active proteins to go and exit the cell. With 3-cell protease inhibitors, you stop that cutting process. So there are no active proteins. And in the absence of active proteins, that polyprotein cannot leave the cell to go infect other cells. And so you cut the virus's replication sample off at its knees, and you have the potential to reduce viral load systemically, which is very important because we're now starting to find that people have reservoirs of virus, even post-COVID, that the virus is continuing to replicate in small quantities and potentially could be what's driving some long COVID. We think that, regardless of whether you're symptomatic, asymptomatic, mild symptoms, you want to kill all the SARS-CoV-2 virus in your body, and 3-cell protease inhibitors are the way to go in order to do that. The 3-cell protease is part of a family, is a protease that is important to a number of viruses that are part of the nidovirus subcategory of coronaviruses. So they're called trypsin-like cysteine proteases. And the 3-cell protease is not just involved in cell division or viral replication. It's also involved actually in the immune system. So one of the things that protease does, there are in fact 70 viral proteases, 3-cell proteases, that's compared to each virion. so every viral particle. And one of the first things it does is manufactures a lot of 3CL protease to go out into the body and shut down this molecule called NEMO, the NFK kappa B essential modulator, which is the cell surface receptor for NFK beta. What that does is that turns off the local immune response. And we believe this is one of the reasons why you get such a high viral load very early, because the body's not recognizing it, and then a hyper response once those viral loads are achieved. If you can have something, in your system that, inhibits the 3CL protease and provides for the NFK beta to respond, there will be a better cellular response. And we think that that could be very important in terms of stimulating the immune system earlier in COVID. And so, this role in stimulating innate immunity is critical because it's actually innate immunity that turns on the cycle storm, that turns on that cytokine storm. It's an overreaction to the virus that turns on the cytokine storm. And if you can normalize this earlier in the disease process, you can reduce the potential for the cytokine storm. With that said, of course, the cytokine storm is there, and we do have a compound within the mixture of the botanical drug that specifically focuses on the cytokine storm and IL-6 in particular, as well as many other markers. And so we think that this combo is really the key to addressing COVID. So as a botanical drug candidate, the two key ingredients are NLC-EXT1, which we discovered, which is a new 3CL protease inhibitor that is natural, and we find it in high concentrations in certain plants. And, those are the plants that we use in our products. And even if you find in lower concentrations some plants, we have that in some of our other products, the Tolavir Daily. And then that we have a cytokine storm activity, which is in low concentration in both the Tolavir and the Tolavir Daily. But the high concentration of 3CL protease inhibitor with the high concentration of the anti-cytokine, that's where Tolavir is and what makes it unique. It's very synergistic activity for patients in the hospital. And in fact, we did a KOL event with LifeSci right before Christmas, where Dr. David Greenberg went through the details of how both the viral phase and the inflammatory phase, they egg each other on. And by being able to dampen both down, you can really cut the cycle and get people out of the hospital. So a little bit about the 3CL protease inhibitor activity, because people are focused on it. First, we are targeting the active site of the 3CL protease. It's one of the reasons why we think we have such good outcomes, even though we don't have the same concentration as Paxlovid. So, that's as a keynote, that's something for people to understand. We're targeting the active site, which is more mechanism-based, whereas Paxlovid, was structure-based. They identified the structure of the receptor and they built something that could work with it. So, but there is, challenges with regards to, function and the dynamics related there too. So if you look at the inhibitory activity, in various similar concentrations, obviously Tolavir is a 40 micromolar. You see similar activity to a related compound that Pfizer was using, the F00835. It ended up not being the lead, but that had similar activity to the current Paxlovid compound. So that's why we use it as comparator. Tolavir was slightly less of inhibitory activity, but still very, very good. And then Tolavir Daily was much less, still more than what you could look at a compound like ivermectin, for example, in their dosing, but much less than the Tolavir or the Tolavir. So if you look at the binding affinity, just to give an example, we've heard a lot of people say, oh, ivermectin is a 3CL protease inhibitor. That's true, but it's very weak. And in order to get to the concentrations you need so it can have a profound effect, it becomes toxic. And that's really why we think the FDA and others are discouraging people from using ivermectin. Yes, you may get an impact if you use it, but the dosing levels you have to take to use it are such that, you may have bad outcomes, and they're trying to avoid that. We understand why people use it, but it's a challenge. We think, that's not the way to go. We agree with the FDA. For us, we're not comparing from a COVID-19 perspective because Tolavir and Tolavir Daily are not approved to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure any disease. But from a binding affinity perspective and a dosing perspective, we think Tolavir Daily is much better than you would likely get. And obviously, we think the safety profile is quite good. And maximum strength Tolavir with regards to binding affinity also is very, very good of getting down to the nanomolar range And then Tolavir is even better. It is submicromolar. It is in the nanomolar range. And Tolavir, Paxlovid, is even better. The thing to think about with regards to the binding affinity is it looks like, based on the functional assays that you see here on the left, the binding is good enough. The Tolavir binding is good enough to have the outcome desired with regards to the 3CL protease. And so that's really the key as we look at this. A little bit on the data that was generated with Tolavir. We use a slightly different, at that time we called it Tolavir, but it's a slightly different formulation. So we saw, this was an observational study, so it was not placebo-controlled, but it was done in a hospital treating COVID patients. 11 were given the Tolavir group, and with that, they took it in varying different dosing regimens, but the outcomes seemed to be the same. So there was a reduction in time in the hospital as compared to a group that was in the hospital at the same similar symptoms. There was a reduction in time in the hospital in the group treated with our product. None of the patients died in the group treated in our product versus 5 that died in the other group. So there were 11 patients in the treated group and 21 patients in the control group. And then, obviously that's a big difference in percentage death. Many few people deteriorated to respirator. This was in the early days of COVID, where people didn't really know how to use this as well. So many people were dying without even getting to a respirator at that point in time. Whereas no one died, no one had to get onto a respirator on our group, which obviously is important. And key here is it's not just clinical stuff, which could be variable. We actually saw a biomarker reduction, and that's really the key for us, because we think that biomarker reduction biomarkers are becoming increasingly important in the development of these products. So the current phase 2, the primary endpoint is time to stable disease. Reduction of time in the hospital is also it's been looked at as a co-primary endpoint. We've been told that it should be a secondary endpoint. The statisticians are really finalizing that based on the guidance provided regulatory agencies now, and that's the last thing needed before the data lock to finalize. However, all 3 of these endpoints, time to stable disease, reduction of time in the hospital, and deaths, those are all obviously critical endpoints. And those are the things that we're going to be looking at clinically very closely. Also, key biomarkers. These are not all the biomarkers we're going to be looking at, but we'll be looking at C-reactive protein, D-dimer, and IL-6. So those are the biomarkers we're going to look at. So from a reg path perspective, we're going down the botanical drug pathway with Tolavir. The ingredients of Tolavir we know are they're authorized by the FDA. So we think that provided we can prove consistency of the formulation, that we can absolutely meet the requirement for the CMC section of botanical drug. Our primary clinical development plan is obviously read out on the phase 2, request EUA in jurisdictions where we have strong relationships in Israel and Greece through our partner. We will be filing a US IND and looking at European IND as well, and then phase 2-3 clinical trials. We do think that it's possible we can get additional EUAs, hopefully, beyond the 2 target countries, depending on the need of each country, because keeping people out of the hospital or getting them out of the hospital is critically important for healthcare systems. And then we have secondary clinical development plans in moderate COVID, so keeping people out of the hospital. Pediatric COVID, as I mentioned, is becoming more interesting, and then long COVID, where we're trying to identify the right subset to go after. So, why is it different? There's obviously significant prior human exposure data, so it's not like we only have 30 patients who've taken the ingredients associated with this. We've got thousands of patients. It's got a very potent anti-3CL protease inhibitor that we discovered, and we qualify all of our material against functional assays to ensure it's got the inhibitory activity. It's got a very strong anti-cytokine that's documented to have strong anti-IL-6, and there's over $20 million invested since the early 2000s when Dr. Arad started this program. So we have a phase 2 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial going on Shahid Zedek Hospital in Jerusalem that will be reading out. Data will come out on January 26th. That's the target date. And we, in parallel, we're already preparing and putting the trial designs together for the phase 2/3s that we expect will be needed for some of the larger jurisdictions. And it's possible you can get, an EUA with a promise to follow up in some of these larger jurisdictions, although we're not counting on that. We're focused on the key jurisdictions where we already have relationships. And then finally, I'll just touch briefly on our proprietary diagnostics. This is the long-term strategy. So we're going to be initiating a clinical study of videssa to get it back into the marketplace. That'll read out sometime in the second half of the year, and we expect to launch in early 2023. Videssa is a breast cancer test to help women with early detection, monitoring, and women who have dense breasts for whom mammograms don't seem to provide a lot of critical information. We also have the Lymph test, where we'll be reading out on confirmatory data from the second half of the clinical study that we already read out on. That'll be reading out in the first half of this year. And then we've got Tolavir, which is our proprietary diagnostic for COVID that we think is quite important. We also have a platform technology called TBIA that we think can use blood and replace potentially all of these tests, but that will take more time because it's AI-based, and we need a lot of inputs to be able to convince the regulators that we've got consistency of data and the right algorithms. Just a little bit about the breast cancer market. 30 million women undergo mammograms annually. That didn't happen in 2020 and 2021, so there's a backlog. So, we expect that hopefully as things ease here in the U.S., people will go back out and get those mammograms. Unfortunately, 40% of women who are undergoing mammograms have dense breasts, and so they get inconclusive results. And so, post-mammogram testing, there's no adequate standard of care, but it's a $7 billion plus market right now that we think we can really target and improve. 32 states have passed legislation requiring providers to tell their patients that they have dense breasts and that mammograms, basically informing them that mammograms may not be the best tool for them. And so they need better tools, and we think videssa could be one of those tools. A little bit about the data on videssa. We have very strong sensitivity in the 90s and a very good negative predictive value in the 98% range. This was all done in the dense breast population. We have, in the non-dense and the dense breast population, it's consistent because it's a biological outcome, not an image-based outcome. Based upon that data, we think we can reduce the number of biopsies by 46% in the U.S. $50 million went into videssa. So there were 3 prospective clinical trials, over 1,000 patients at some of the best centers in the U.S. We have a high degree of confidence in the data. We also have a blood test for Alzheimer's disease, where we'll be reading out on a 40-patient study with correlation with amyloid PET, which is why it was so small, because the correlation is very strong. Amyloid PET is the current gold standard, but there are a lot of issues with it. And a blood test for Alzheimer's disease could pre-screen patients who really are the ones that need to go and take the amyloid PET and ultimately try the amyloid therapies that are coming onto the market, although they don't appear to be highly effective. We think cancer mechanisms are better. Just a note on the Lymph clinical data, we had a p-value of 0.000002 in terms of the correlation with amyloid PET in the first part of the study. And so the second readout would confirm that, and we're very excited about its future. Touching on Tolavir test, we think that this could be quite additive to current antigen testing. We know antigen testing, while it's great to have rapid antigen tests at the point of care or at home, the challenge is the biology is such that they identify the disease after PCR, sometimes several days after. And so the window is such that you can test negative in the morning and positive at night. So you can't necessarily rely on those results, although it is great to have those tools. We think that we can improve upon that by adding the 3-cell protease, because 3-cell protease can be identified earlier than antigen and potentially earlier than PCR. So when we see, quote unquote, false negative by PCR, we think 3-cell protease can identify that and overcome a number of issues. And on the back end, because the 3-cell protease is directly related to replication of the virus, the whole question about when can you leave quarantine, this is something that we specifically targeted. So in our trial in the hospitalized patients, what we found is that there were several people who were released after their 2 weeks that were still replicating. And that's why it's very scary to see the CDC come out with guidance saying that 5 days and you can be released without a test. A rapid antigen test should be a minimum standard to be released post-quarantine. We don't think 5 days is enough. based upon the data we've seen, and we think that it's likely that this is going to continue and further the spread. It's becoming critical now to bring these out to market. We have plans, but that's not the focus of today's presentation, so we'll talk about that later. And as I mentioned, we have this AI platform, TBIA, that could ultimately replace many of these tests, but that's going to take longer time to come to market. We do have CE mark in breast cancer and colorectal cancer, so there, we do have some regulatory chops in this area, but the focus commercially is going to be videssa. We've got a great team. Two key people to note: Dr. Jorge Leon, previously a senior executive at Quest Diagnostics; Paula Trapaz, who was senior executive at Eli Lilly; Elise Brownell, who was a senior executive at Bayer; and Valentino Smith, who is a key marketing person both at Novartis and at Merck. And then we have a lot of the operations team really looking to drive and bring this forward. So in summary, we've got proprietary technology platforms, scalable models. We're looking for a number of partnerships, both in therapeutic and on the diagnostic side. We're generating revenue now and have additional near-term revenue generating opportunities with Tolavir that could be quite large. If even we get 1% of what's projected for Pfizer, it would be transformative for Todos. If we got 10% of what's projected for Pfizer's 3-cell protease inhibitor, that would be amazing. And the way we look at the protease inhibitor product Tolavir is it's really going to be priced because it's in a hospital setting. We expect it to be priced more like Gilead's remdesivir than an outpatient pill that you would take at home, because the key endpoint is reducing days in the hospital, and each day in the hospital, at least in the US, can be upwards of $20,000 a day. So if you can reduce that by 4 or 5 days, you're talking about significant pharmacoeconomic benefit to the system. And we're going after some huge markets, obviously $400 billion plus more in markets between our cancer, Alzheimer's, and COVID. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our presentation. I know I was long-winded, but I wanted to make sure we covered the key points. And I am open to questions if there are any that we are allowed to take.
Great presentation, as always. Such a wealth of knowledge that you have, Gerald. We are out of time, but let's try to get in one question. Edward Kasparovich asks, have you had any big pharma expressing interest in the results of your trial results?
I can't discuss because of various non-disclosure agreements, but yes, obviously everybody's interested in something that can reduce time in the hospital and stop death in COVID. So there's a lot of interest. Obviously people want to see the data. And obviously there's a lot of focus on manufacturing. We are looking at potentially acquiring our own manufacturing so we can have full control of that. And we have to build it as if we're going to do it ourselves, but obviously, we're very much open to partnerships because we know to actually bring this to market, we'll need for it to achieve its full potential, it will need additional resources beyond what Todos has, and we are certainly open to that.
Great. Well, we have tons of questions for you, but please join us again so we can hear your presentation once again, and we'll send all these questions to you so you can answer on your own time. Thank you so much, Gerald.
Yeah, thank you. And the update will be out later today in writing. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, everyone stay with us. We're coming up with our next presenter. We'll be right back.